Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Spiritist Conversations. You know the drill, the show where we sit down with friends to talk about things through an informal lens in an unscripted and totally informal way. We are very excited today to have a very interesting topic and even more interesting guests. Today, we are talking about planetary transition. What is this planetary transition thingy that keeps popping up in Spiritism? And we are broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, you can always listen to the audio version of this through podcast, whatever you get your podcasts. But let's set that aside and let's invite our guests and co-hosts for today so that we can make sure that we get the show on the way. So first with us, we have our friend Flavio. Hi, Flavio. Say hi to everybody.
Hello, folks. I'm here in the beautiful Commonwealth, Massachusetts, as usual. Looking forward to yet another Spiritist Conversations.
Wonderful. And with us always as well, our favorite friend, that's not called Flavio, Susanna.
Hello, everybody. I'm here again, Susanna Simões from Miami. Looking forward to another great show and being with friends and connecting with all the folks who are joining us live right now.
Wonderful. And so you know the three of us. We've been here for a while, but we're also very excited to welcome another guest back in the show. She's actually been in the show before, but you might not have heard her because one of the shows that we recorded with her in the streets of Washington, D.C. never made it because the sound quality wasn't good enough. But today we get to have her back. And so say hi to Heather. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Flavio. Hi, Susanna. I'm glad to join you all once again and be here live in person. I'm joining from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
There you go.
Great. All right. So here we go. Another Spiritist conversation. This one is about planetary transition. So let's do what we often do, which is just pop a question out there. So what is this planetary transition thing? Where do we start, guys?
I think we could start by trying to define what it is, right? First, there is a book written by Emmanuel Miranda that talks about it. But for the folks that are listening or watching us, can we maybe in 30 seconds explain what that is?
You were so good at this, right? He made a question and you just like, I don't know, make it look cute, like something like that, and throw it back at us. I mean, you should start answering in 30 seconds. Actually, I'll give you 27 seconds to answer.
He just pulled the old, like when the teacher asks you a question, you don't know what to do, just ask a question back, right?
Ask a question with the question.
Exactly. Is it the end of the world? Are things going to, the world's going to come to an end sooner than later?
All right, let me tee that up a little bit, right? So planetary transition. So when we're transitioning, we're going from one state to another. As we learn in Spiritism, we're going from a planet of trials and expiations, right, that we live in these days, towards a more enlightened planet, as we call it, the planet of regeneration, right? So what does that mean, right? In plain English, how can we translate that, right? Regeneration, what does that mean? I mean, that's the pure definition, and I wanted to get into it, right?
It was 47 seconds. Heather?
Thank you for keeping us accountable, Susanna.
Yes. I'm just going to throw out there some concepts that I think we'll be addressing over the course of the conversation. Is just to, throw them on the board to start the conversation. We talk about the evolution of the planet, the evolution of the individuals. We'll talk about probably the kind of evolution that we're talking about, principally with planetary transition. And all that's come up recently is the moral transition, right? Because we transform, we evolve intellectually and morally. So at this point, we've come pretty far intellectually, and we got to play catch up on the moral side in order to really make the world a better place, right? And continue our spiritual progress.
All right. So let me take on what you said, Heather. Right?
Yeah.
We've got to catch up on the moral side of the house.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the data, it shows that we have never before have done so much volunteering work than we're doing right now. Right? The world is a much better place than it was, a century or a couple of centuries ago. Right? Today, it's not okay anymore for the most part of the world to commit some atrocities that 70, 80 years ago, right? We as a society committed. What are we missing, right, from a society perspective to catch up morally, in your understanding?
I think you bring up a really good point, because a lot of people look around and think that, we're going backwards, like things are just simply going down in the dumps. And as you said, we are actually in a better place than we were, a couple centuries ago, but we're still dragging our feet. We have, and if you look, there's a whole range of characters living in this planet, right? So our goal is to get toward a state in which we have a little bit more uniform tendency toward the good. So those individuals that you talk about out there doing this kind of charity work and reaching out to help others, they're in the right place. We have plenty of individuals that are still kind of lost, though, and some that are just way off the path. So in order for the planet to actually evolve, we need to improve things among more, like, let's say, the masses, right? We need a little bit more uniform condition or disposition, you could say, of moral virtue. That's not to say that we're going to jump right from one to the other, that anybody needs to, make a leap into perfection, because this is a process of transformation. But there is, in spite of all the progress we've made, Flavio, we still have a whole lot of suffering, and the spirit realm wants to help us move on from that, right?
But let me throw a wrench in this over here, right? So it looks like the planet is always in transition, because the planet is always in transition. So we can say in one way that we're always in a planetary transition. But what makes these times that we're living in today, right now, so special? How is that different from any other point in time? And why do sometimes we feel like this is, the end of times? I think Susanna was bringing that up, right?
Yeah, we are always in transition because we are under one of the divine laws, which is the law of progress. So whether we want it or not, we are progressing constantly. So we are constantly moving. Although we may not feel that way, but that is always part of nature, that we are moving forward, that we are progressing. Now, one of the concepts that I find particularly intriguing and really challenging and really bothersome, if you will, that the spirits bring in the spirits book, because it comes to challenge ourselves in our sense of pride, the pride that we take for our evolution, is a question in the spirits book where the spirits tell us that we are still in the first phases of civilization. So we really, really like to think of ourselves as civilized individuals, given the level of progress that we have already made, and agree with Heather and Flavio on both wings, so to speak, right? Intellectually and morally. But the spirits are going to tell us that, while we live in a planet where selfishness and pride still prevail, where self-interest is still our primary motor, we cannot call ourselves civilized. So I think that that's an incredible blow in our pride. And then, so yes, we have progressed morally, but what we see is an incredible discrepancy on the rate of progress between intellectuality and morality. And still, we are, very much driven in everything that we do in one way or another by self-interest. So just going back to Dan's point, so the way progress takes place, and that's all over Kardec's codification, right? It is a slow pace, but from time to time, God gives us a little push forward, and humanity undergoes some sort of crisis where we can see that happening right now. I mean, people have been shaken out of their comfortable zone and have been pushed to create solutions, to come up with different ideas. So intellect and reach out to each other. We have been forced to look at our neighbors in ways that we haven't. So right now, the end of the times, what we see is like major crises hitting our humanity and really, helping progress to take place a little faster.
Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback on what Susanna just said, right? Because if we go back to the Christian eschatology, right? Jesus mentioned about the great tribulation that the world was going to go through. And oftentimes our fellow brothers and sisters, right, Christ followers, connect that with the end of the world or the end of times. As we learn, however, from Spiritism, that great transition or the sign of turbulent times or the beginning of pain, as Jesus very well mentioned, right, it is the beginning of the transition towards a better place, a better planet for all of us to live, right? So is that what you're referring to, Susanna?
Yes, I mean we are moving towards a better planet, and the spirits have said that we have achieved a place of material well-being. Our intellect has taken us to a place of material well-being. What's missing right now for us to live is a place of moral well-being. In other words, we need to get to a place where not only we are sitting in wonderful chairs under the comfort of a room with air conditioning and electricity and all the material achievements that we have done to this point, but we need also to be feeling peaceful and a sense of well-being within. And so that's where, religion, spirituality, we are all spirits here, but any path that can help humankind to connect with what essential, with life, right? With the true meaning of life, with God, if that's what you call a higher force, a higher power, that's what we are, and with one another, seeing on, one another, a brother and a sister, someone who is equal. So those are the feelings that I think at this point we need to focus and to seek to develop. And this is what's going to make the world, because you can be in a world that is 1,000% comfortable, materially speaking, and yet you are in wars.
Wars,
whether it's wars between individuals, between countries, or inner wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Diana,
I think we need to jump in there, because I think that, Susanna makes a great point, which we should also kind of make sure we hit, that it's not just about the individual, but all individuals too. Because I think that what she's alluding to, and I think I want to kind of double click on that piece, is it's a shift, this consciential shift between just me to all of us, right? That the rising tide lifts all boats, that nobody wins until everybody wins. And I think that we are still in that selfish mode, and we haven't awakened that collective wellness mode that Susanna is describing. I remember when I first read question 132 of the Spirits book, which is one of my favorites. And And it's basically like a meaning of life question, right? And in that question, the Kardec asks the spirit, so what's the purpose of reincarnating and so forth? And they say, well, it's twofold. One is for us to evolve. And if you don't read carefully, like the follow-up piece, a couple of sentences down, it has like a beautiful poetic thing that says, and play our part in the creation, which kind of means that we are here to evolve ourselves, to learn and grow, but we're also here for others, that we also play a part in helping the welfare of people in general, right?
Others.
And I think that sometimes like we don't even see or register that part in the question because we're so like focused on ourselves that we're like, oh, what do I learn? What is it for me? Like, how do I figure this stuff out? That we forget that we also have responsibilities, not just rights. And I think that Susanna is speaking to that piece of like inner transformation, inner calm comes from understanding our place in the collective and playing our part in helping other people get there. And let's leave aside the whole eschatology, which is the study of the end of the world that Flavio was talking about. We should go back to that later because that's pretty cool. But I love that Susanna's pointing to that, right? Because it's clear to us there's a lot of people out there who have everything. They're beautiful, they're famous, they have tons of money, and yet they are choosing to to leave life. They're like committing suicide. They're not happy, and they apparently have everything. So clearly this materialistic world that we think is the best thing for us in terms of actions and attitudes is not. And it's not working out great. And we are needing to rethink all that stuff, right? And so there's this bubbling, I think, too. This like moment where people are like, what should I be doing? What's my purpose? What's my meaning in life? And I think that kind of tells us that there's something special in this moment in time of our history that we need to kind of consider and make changes.
Dan, I just wanted to, your question about how do we know, like, what's different about this too. Kardec himself, in the Genesis, he talked about the fact that this transition, as you said, the planet is always in transition, but now we're talking about which transition, the one from the world of trials and expiations to the world of regeneration. Kardec himself wrote that we're standing in this sort of midway point. That doesn't mean, that it's coming tomorrow, right? But he talks about, this generation going out and the new generation coming in. That's not a corporeal generation, but more a spiritual generation. So, he writes that in this time, we're going to see, not only the things like the catastrophes, and events like that touch us and cause a reflection among a great number of individuals and really allow opportunity for the exercise of compassion among those willing and wanting to help their brothers and sisters in need. But also he says that there will be a clash of ideas. And to me, that really resonated because we see right now so much division in people, so many of us are clashing in our thoughts, whether it be, political or religious. And quite frankly, we're not shy to tell each other, it seems, but it's to the point that it's like too much. And we need to learn to have more respect. But all of this, like Susanna mentioned the word crisis, and that was a word when I, was doing some reading, I keep seeing coming up in different texts is like this idea of crisis before the calm. Kind of made me think about, we're hearing about people with COVID-19, the ones that are able to recover. It's like their temperature goes way up. And then almost right after that, that's when they start to feel better, right? It's just like, it's like when the waves come crashing, everything's building, and then that receding, that's going to happen. So if Kardec, just want to say, if Kardec himself had not mentioned it, we might be able to see through, it makes sense. The planet is always in transition. We're better than we were before. But for me, coming to Spiritism and reading in these books, the fact that, this is happening, and we see, we can touch on Manuel's book, like Bob, you said, he actually says, it's happening now, right? These these spirits are incarnating, many of them now, that are going to help us. Of course, that's always a normal part of the process, but I think it's happening in big numbers.
Yeah, and I should say
Yeah, I
that
wanted
this
to-
illusion
I wanted
that
to
just really quickly that Heather's alluding to Genesis, which is the fifth book that Kardec put
Yep.
together, and the last chapter of the book, and actually the little one before that, little bit before that, 17 too, talks about this new phase, this new transition in this so-called end of times, right? Because I would argue that we are in the end of times. But not in a way that we had made it believe, right? That whole idea of the end of the world, because we're so materialistic, we think that the end of the world means the end of the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually means the end of the ways in which we have behaved in this materialistic world. And we are towards the end of the world where we're being asked to change our attitudes, to change the way we think and we do things. And I think that's what's really interesting about this whole idea of eschatology or the apocalypse, right? We use the word apocalypse to mean the end of things, but it actually from the Greek means to reveal, right? So apocalypse is revelation. It's a revealing of something that was hidden, right? So we are in apocalypse. We are revealing something that, knew that we have been told was going to happen, but that we're beginning to grasp a little by little. So sorry there, Flavio, I cut you off, which is my favorite thing to do.
No, man, it's fine. I can return the favor. So I'm glad you mentioned apocalypse and the etymological definition of that, because Heather mentioned crisis. And if you look at also crisis, that means decision, right? So every time we're in crisis means that we have to decide on something.
Mm-hmm.
So the planetary transition is an invitation for us to decide or make better choices for the future. It's to really travel within ourselves, to look at things from a different angle, of a different perspective, right? As we mentioned in the beginning, it's that call to action for us to look at our brothers and sisters with different set of eyes. We're really, putting ourselves more in other people's shoes, right? Because we had an amazing, development, right? We all have the comfort of our homes. Most of us, anyways, have the comfort of our homes, air conditioning. For us here in the Northeast, we need heating systems to make us cozy and warm and all that, right? You guys don't do that in Florida, I know that. But when you look at that, that's a lot of development from a technological, standpoint. But from the moral, from the philosophical area that we're all looking at each other as really siblings, I think we have a long way to go. And this journey starts inside each one of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a question from Carol, because I think it hits the point that you were talking about, Flavio. Carol saying, does the COVID vaccine represent a mark of the beast in Revelations? In the Bible, it says there would be a rapture first before the tribulation. Which of these are metaphors according to what Spiritism speaks? So I think we're talking about it, right? I think that we are talking about this idea that this transition piece is something that has been, quote, quote, foretold, because Christ, as such an elevated spirit, knew what was ahead for us and understood where things are, and that there would be this moment of transition. However, we make these things to be sometimes a little bit different than what they were originally intended. Like the word apocalypse has taken another meaning as we're talking about. Christ has taken another meaning, right? This whole idea of end of times is exactly this transformation that we need to go through because we created it too, right? There's the beautiful passage, and the allegory in the Bible between the wheat and the chaff, right? Because they're two of the same. They look alike when they're young, right? When you just seeded them, you can't really tell them apart. So the way that you can separate the chaff from the wheat is to let them grow a little bit, and then when they grow, you can tell them apart. And then you can remove the chaff and throw that into the fire, so to speak, and so it goes, right? So I think it's a beautiful spiritual allegory with reincarnation. Like, we all start from the same place, but as we grow old, we can see how we're doing. And if we are deviating this way or that way, and then it gets to a point where the wheat needs to continue to grow and the chaff needs to be removed because it's holding the wheat back. And then it's thrown somewhere else, right? Because that's what's best for the wheat and what's best for chaff as well. So I think we are in that process. So I would read in that biblical passage this whole idea of rapture. It is a rapture with the past habits. It's not that people are going to disappear from earth all of a sudden, right? I think that our
Right.
imagination has taken over a little bit on that side and failed to understand. And the good news is that we also know this because the spirits are telling us.
Yeah.
They are coming and frequently
Yeah.
telling us, and that, you know, they have been telling us since the 1850s and even before.
Yeah.
But the Genesis, the stuff that Heather was alluding to, was also messages from the spirits that Kardec was reprinting and letting us understand. So it's a fascinating moment, pivotal moment in our collective history.
There is
Absolutely.
a question here too, where Raphael and Ana Paula both making specific reference, right, to COVID-19 as part of planetary transition. And I just, as I read this question, I got this idea that perhaps some people might think that COVID-19 was something that God sent to the planet in order
And
to...
as the defining moment, right? No.
Yeah, it was sent
Yeah.
to the planet as part of this transition, as something that came from outside,
Yeah.
And so what, we did talk a little bit about this in previous episodes of Spirits Conversations, but I think it's worth it to mention once more that, God does not, some people might have an understanding that God, punishes us or sends specific trials per se. In fact, what we see today, the environmental conditions of the planet outside, right? They are deeply connected to the environmental conditions of our own souls. In fact, the outside is always reflecting, and the planet is evolving. And this is also in Genesis, in the same chapter, that talks about the physical evolution of the planet being very deeply correlated to the moral evolution of humanity. So when we see the virus, the mutations, the new diseases that are being formed, all this is an effect, right? It's an effect to the ways in which we have been living. Is an effect of the paradigms that we have been electing for ourselves, material paradigms, and all is a reflection of the deep disconnection that we have from God at this moment. So I just want to point that out because I got this idea in my mind as something that was being sent to us, as opposed to something that has been the result. It's our own creation, right? We created an environment that allows for the manifestation of things like that. And this is precisely how God works through its laws. So when we are going astray and going a little crazy and a little too much in our deviations, in our imbalances, we deal with the consequences. So it's as God saying, hey, all right, I let you guys go up to here. Right now, stop, okay? It's time to go back home, reset, take a little time off and think a little bit about how we're going to move forward. But understand that this is not something that this man who is sitting on top of a cloud decided to send to us. Here you go, a whole bunch of viruses, right? No, it's part of the divine law. And yes, it's necessary perhaps that, it's a critical moment. It's a critical moment in the sense that we really need to stop and think, how are we going to go forward? Because it's time. There is a time that comes where things must move forward. So we have free will up to a certain point, but God has its time too. And right now it's time. This planet must move forward. So, the laws will conspire in such a way that, we can get ready. We can be in a position to inherit our own planet as a new and transformed planet.
Yeah, and we always think that transition is for other people, right?
You guys today are like,
Yeah.
like...
All right,
I want
Slowpoke,
to
you
tell
go
what
for
you
it.
just said. All right, I'll go first. So you mentioned that, of course, all of us have free will, right? But at some time, if I read you correctly, if I understood you correctly, you said sometimes, right? God interferes, or the universe interferes in our ability to choose. So let me put this scenario in front of all of us, right? Imagine I'm that individual that I'm not changing, right? I'm still stuck on my old, self. I'm still stuck on my selfishness. I'm still in that old behavior that I only care about myself. I couldn't care less about anybody else, right? What's going to happen to me in this transition?
Good question, sir. So I love that you are, saying that you're going to be left behind. It's almost like a rapture thing. Can we leave Flavio behind? I think that's part of the question. Your analysis, Flavio, is not really far away, and we see that
Right.
almost daily without necessarily using those words, right? We see people who are struggling a little bit with the idea of being in this together, right? We are struggling with people caring for each other, and I think that we see a lot of that on the masks thing and taking care of each other and being in a home quarantine. This debate is going on, and a lot of people are saying, but I want to go out. I need to do my things, and
Yeah.
and I'm not saying you're right or wrong, right? Let's get me wrong, because I know that people also need to make a living. But I think this moment is specifically interesting because it's asking us to shift our mentality and say, we're not wearing masks just so that we can protect ourselves. We are wearing masks so that we can help others, because in helping others, we help ourselves. It's almost like biologically, we are being led to the golden rule, right? That I want to make sure that I am okay. And I'm only going to be okay if everybody else around me is okay. I think we said this before. If you buy all the hand sanitizer out there, it's not going to keep you safe. Because if I am not sanitized myself and I'm interacting with you, you can be as quote, quote, clean as you may be, but, I will not. So I might pass the virus to you. So it's really an interesting process where we have to reflect about how we carry out our business and shift away from this idea of, like, I'm going to hog all the resources I can. Yeah. Right, to protect me only and my family, because all of a sudden you and your family cannot be protected if everybody else is not either, right? So we talked a little bit about this stuff before, but it's an interesting shift morally for us to start to focus on other things and question the ways that we were doing business before, right?
Well, especially because one of the two moral conditions that are most impeding our progress and our own way of being is selfishness, right? So that has everything to do with what's going on right now, Dan, and what you were saying in terms of the attitude that we choose to take, and how much compassion we have toward one another.
And this planetary transition will no longer talk. It's like back to what Susanna was saying in the free will piece, right? So yes, we have free will. But free will does not mean that we get a pass from the consequence of our actions, right? So if I do something and it has a consequence, I need to deal with it. I can choose not to deal with it in the moment, but I have to deal with it later. And it kind of adds up life after life.
And the moment our actions impact anyone else, there's a point where you have to stop and think first, right? It's not like you said, you still have your free will, but you have to consider the impact of your actions. What do you want that to be, and what kind of consequences then come back to you, good or bad, right?
Yeah, I think this is a great philosophical point, because when we look at we are solely responsible for everything that happens to us, right? Yeah. The good things that happen to us, we are fully responsible. The quote unquote not so good things that happen to us, we're also responsible. The moment we acknowledge that and understand, right, our life, our sort of mindset changes, right? I should not treat so and so this way, because guess what, right? If I make that person feel awful, I'm responsible, right? I'm accountable for that. I think the moment we acknowledge that, our mindset changes. I think that, to me, this is the most beautiful philosophical, point of spiritism that really opens our eyes and minds to see the world with different set of eyes, right? And I think he's even, this day and age that we have all these difficulties. I think we were talking about, Raphael's question before, right? We had an episode on COVID. I invite everybody that's listening or watching us to go back sometime later and watch or listen to that. It's an amazing episode that we recorded. But everything that's in front of us, right? We are co-responsible. How do we make the best out of it? I think that's the question we all should be asking ourselves, right?
Yeah, and how do we fight this like mystical approaches to things that sometimes we like to create too, right? Sometimes we like to create stories in our heads for whatever reasons, whether it's a conspiracy theory out, about why we are where we are, or whether these are like the end of times with the end of the world. It seems that sometimes like a human psyche has this need to create these dramatic stories, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's pretty serious business, the times that we're in, right? But if you think about it, every moment that we live in is pretty serious, right?
Well, it's always easier if you can point to a cause outside of yourself, right, and not consider yourself.
What? You mean I have to take responsibility, Heather?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that inner work that Susanna was talking about. That's for you
Yeah.
guys. You guys are the problem. I'm just fine. If you guys weren't there, the world would be a better place.
And that's why to be a religious person, in the past was a lot easier, because we would just listen to what the pastor, the priest, or the clerical folks were talking. So, okay, I should go do this without doing a lot of critical thinking. Was a lot easier than today that we learned from Spiritism, that we should listen, knowledge, internalize, think critically, right, and collaborate with what we're learning.
Yeah.
Right? A much more difficult approach, but at the same time reaps a lot more benefits down the road as well, right?
Can we talk about what Flavio said, being left behind? What that would even mean? What do you mean by being left behind?
Heather, are you saying that you want to leave Flavio behind? Did I get that right?
No, not at all. I don't want Flavio left behind.
Look at that.
What?
Oh, no more screen time for Flavio. So I think it's a great point. Let's double click on that. So what is it to be left behind, right? Because I think that we all have a fear of being left behind and disconnected to normally. I think many of us feel like, our own insecurities are at play here. But we also know that these are important times. And I think that we might always have, and let me back up and say, reincarnation is amazing, right? Because once we begin to understand and think more about reincarnation, I think it can explain a lot of things that sometimes we struggle with, even in the emotional idea, this idea of disconnection, of being away from your people. I think, we have been learning through the times, the spirits have been telling us that we do reincarnate. We reincarnate as many times as it takes for us to evolve. And then if we go faster than the speed at which Earth is evolving, then we go and incarnate in another place, where we will then continue to incarnate and continually evolve and so forth. So this idea of being left behind is really interesting, because it's this idea like, hey, if we are not moving as fast as the planet is evolving, it might be that at one point in time, we're going to have to get off this bus and catch
That's exactly
another
the
bus.
analogy that
Right?
I was thinking.
We're going to have to catch the other bus, because you know what? We're holding this bus up, and this bus got to go. So if I'm being too racky, I'm going to be put on the other bus, and then I will then be able to help other people.
Yeah,
right?
like I don't
Because
want
I
to
know
sit
the way.
down. I want to stand up and walk around, so I can't go on the fast bus, right? It's like you rebel a bit.
100%.
But you know what? I was, reading in Kardec, and some people might think like, okay, so anyone that doesn't match the threshold at this point, they're out of here. But Kardec cautions it's not exactly like that, because what there are spirits that they are able to, upon returning to the spirit realm after this life, they're still able to stop and reflect and maybe see, the error of their ways. In this world, they were under, all the material influences that we undergo, but yet they still have let's say, the predisposition to look at the reflections that the spiritual benefactors in the spirit realm will help them to make, and kind of re-engage themselves in the effort to make improvements, and they will get to come back here. So, you know, there's a difference. It's not just like after this life, that's it. You know, we're gonna come back, or we're gonna be exiled. You
Kicked
know,
out.
there's like gradation in there, and even spirits that, you know, maybe they get off the bus, they're not ready for the speed. They still get to come back on the bus when they've gotten to have their time.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and
Heather, there's an assumption in that thing too, right? We're assuming that we're always in the same bus.
Yeah.
That we were made for just one bus.
Right.
And we get many buses to go different places.
Exactly.
So
I would like to answer Ana Paula's comment that you put it over there. So here's what I would say to her. So I'm more afraid of being left behind in the sense of if everyone else is morally evolved and I discover that I'm not. If you discover that you are not, I assure you that you will make it.
Right.
The ones who are thinking that they are morally evolved are likely the ones that won't make it. Right? I'm not, I have to look at someone. I mean, I cannot close my eyes.
Don't look at us.
I think you know, jokes apart, I think that speaks to a level of awareness, you know, that the majority of people out there don't have. So many times in the gospel, when, you know, there are so many passages that refer to the ones who are sleeping and the need for awakening, right? So when Jesus is about to be taken and he goes to pray, and he asks the disciples to stay awake and pray with him, and they fall asleep. And so Emmanuel has a beautiful page where he is going to interpret this passage, and he's going to talk about how the majority of us is in this life asleep. We cannot be awake, not even for 1 hour, which is the time that he was. And by 1 hour, he compares that to one existence, because our existence is just 1 hour or much less in the, you know, relative to eternity. So I think that if you were saying that, it shows that you are someone who is already seeking to be awake, seeking understanding of your more evolution, trying to get to know yourself. And so another thing that is in this chapter of Genesis is that we don't need to be saints. We don't need to be perfect.
Right.
We don't need to be like, you know, the ultimate expression of goodness. We just need to be seeking to be better. And if that is part of our daily efforts, you know, most likely we will, you know, not be left behind.
I would even say, Susanna, that it's impossible, quote unquote, impossible to be perfect in this lifetime that we are.
No, absolutely.
Speak for yourself, buddy.
Oh, I don't know. Exactly.
All of us here are, except for you.
Oh, really?
See how I co-opted everybody into the thing? No, you're right. I love that. I love that, Flavia. I think Susanna hit in there, like, you know, we're not being asked to be morally perfect to stay on the bus. Right. Just to be aware that there is a need for personal transformation. That's all it takes. It's will, right? You know, peace on earth and goodwill amongst people, right? Like, all it takes is not sainthood. It's just goodwill. Are we willing to work on those things? And not on others, not working on others, working on ourselves.
Yeah.
We work on the stuff that we can control. The only stuff that we can control barely is ourselves, right? We can't save the world other than changing ourselves.
Yeah, I want to bring back Jesus to the conversation, because when he said watch and pray, or pray and watch, a lot of people believe that it's to pray and watch others, but it's actually not. It's to pray and watch ourselves, right? But there's a lot of mistake. A lot people are mistakenly confused a lot of times. Oh, let me watch what so and so is doing. No, let's pray and watch.
I always interpret that as, you know, I watch Spiritist conversations on YouTube.
Oh, or watch Netflix. Exactly.
I would like to say hi to Mackenzie.
Yes.
Mackenzie, good to hear from you, buddy.
Yeah, Mackenzie, we're going to have to get you back here. Mackenzie is a friend of the show from the early beginnings. And so thank you for tuning in, buddy. We miss you. We need to get you in here. But that's a great point, right? In general, that we are talking about this moment of awareness and self awareness and tolerance, and
Yeah.
understanding that we're not number one, right? There is no number one. Sure, we take care of ourselves, but we have to expand our consciousness to understand that there's other people here, part of the team as well. And the
100%.
selfishness, society has no longer a place for it. Like, let me rephrase that. The future world, the way in which we're going, will have very little tolerance for us if we are not making that transition towards a more encompassing frame of mind,
And
right?
it
Which is
starts with
good for change.
self-awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there in chapter 3 of the gospel, there is the classification of the different worlds, and so we are considered a planet of trial and expiation. And the definition of these type of planets is where matter prevails over the spirit and evil prevail over good. Every time I spoke about this topic and I did a lecture on it, my mind went like, oh, there's, the world out there is full of evil, right? But when the spirits are telling us that evil prevails over good, that means that in our nature, each one of us, because if you are in this planet, that's where you are. That's not who you are in essence, but that's where you are in awareness. And so, because of our actions are essentially driven by self-interest, right? So we still live in a world where evil prevails over goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about, going back to Jesus, shine your light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shining our lights means that in order for that to happen, it's not like we're going to flick something and the light's going to turn on. That means that we have to acknowledge and enter our own darkness. And as we are able to enter courageously and consciously our own darkness, little by little, that darkness gets to dissipate and light is turned on. So I really like this concept. And, we are like, we're not close to the end, but we are heading towards the end. And so I think that it's important that, bring back the concept of, because people are like, okay, we are transitioning. What done to talk about what cooperation? What is my role? What can I do? Right? What is my contribution? So if the world is in transition, what is my role in this? And your role is not to save the world, although there's a lot that we can do outwards. But our primary concern should be doing, okay, so if the environment out there is such, and I'm part of it, how can I make it better starting from my own self?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that, Sue. I love that. But I think it's also nice to point out for folks that sometimes we make stories about darkness in our minds, right? But darkness is nothing but the absence of light.
Right.
Even physically, it's not a thing of itself. It doesn't live. Like, it's just the absence of
Not a force.
enlightenment,
Yeah.
right? So it's not that there is two forces at play in the world. It's just there is self-interest, like Susanna was saying, and a more communal Christ consciousness of caring for everybody at once. And our job is to awaken to that reality, which is, I think, like, to go back to our previous comments, which is something that pops up often in the New Testament, right? I'm reminded too, piggybacking on Susanna's comment, of the beautiful sentence from Ephesians, a letter that Paul writes. It says, "Awaken you who sleeps," right? And the Christ will shine upon you. So if we awaken to this spiritual reality that transcends our physical body, then this new knowledge, this new understanding will come to us, and we will see things differently because there's going to be light, right? When there's only selfishness. So it's a pretty cool perspective in general. And that's our challenge. It's really hard. And it's moments of COVID might be the time out that we need to kind of kickstart that process a little bit more, right? To be a little bit more considerate. I know I'm rethinking the way I live life. Right? So,
I think all of us are. I mean, or most of us are, I should say, right? And everything that we see in front of us, it's an invitation. It's a call to action for us to look at things either differently or towards a more encompassive, or what's the word I'm looking for? More of a collaborative with other folks around us, right? Sometimes we are driven by behaviors that, if we really stop and think about them, really do the whole inner journey that we talked about a few minutes ago, It's like, why am I doing this? Why am I spending a lot of my time on X versus Y? If I already know that the spiritual life is the real life, why do I still spend so much time caring only for my material life, right? That's also important, but not more important than my spiritual life. I mean, let's do just an assessment internally. How many hours in 24 hours a day that we have do we spend, helping or really watering our spiritual self as opposed to watering our material self? Again, these
Yeah.
questions are right. I think it's a great call to action.
Any situation that, those moments, those events that all of a sudden we stop and we say to each other, wow, you don't know tomorrow. Do what you can today. Go hug your loved ones. Any of these things make us consider the transitory nature of material life, of our own physical bodies. Gets us to that point, like Flavio was saying, where we stop and think, what am I doing with my time? Right? And I think that that's a situation that many of us find ourselves in right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to comment on the question 919 of the Spirit's book that is so often mentioned also in our talks and things like that. One particular interesting thing about this question, I mean, the answer is spectacular, but the question is also extremely important to be analyzed, because there Kardec is going to ask the spirits what is the most efficacious way to improve and to overcome our, I don't recall exactly the words, but our
Shortcomings.
our shortcomings. And so it's not just like, how do we do this? It's like, what is the best way? Which way works the best? And the spirits didn't answer, go to a study group in the center, or stop and pray, or or do as many talks, or go out and do charity, distribute food. None of that, right? So the most efficacious way for enlightenment is to go deep inside. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
It's
and
a process.
It also hints to a daily process, right? Which I think Saint Augustine that gives that answer tells us, do as I did every day. It's not like do it as a one-time thing. Right?
Yeah.
It's like every day you got to go back and ask yourself, what is it that you are doing, and does that
it needs to be a way of living, not a practice. It's something that needs to be just like into our routines, you know what I mean? And a lot of times what I like to remind people is like, relationships are the best thermometer or the best instrument for us to do this work, right? So how do I get to know myself? Well, look at your actions, but most importantly, look at your reactions, because your reactions are the ones that are truly going to tell you where you are. Because when you're reacting, you're not thinking. Is your instinct, is your most primitive self speaking. And so if we just get into the habit of look how we react in our relationships, in face of the circumstances, we're going to start have hints of the areas that we need to better understand, that we have to be minimally curious about. Why is that person getting to me so deeply? Why am I reacting this way? Where are these feelings coming from? And so as a starting point, right, for the process.
So let me ask a question to all of us.
Oh, hold on. We're wrapping up, sir. Are you going to wrap us up?
Absolutely, man.
All right.
Have we answered the question? What is this planetary transition?
Well, depends on who you ask, right? So I would say, can we change your question slightly, Flavio, and say,
absolutely.
So what is, given everything that we talked about, if we were to summarize it, so what is this planetary transition thing? Who wants to go first?
He did to me what I did in the beginning. Do you guys notice that?
Yes.
He gave that right back to
I'm
me.
going to say,
Exactly.
I'm going to
It's
say,
called revenge.
it's called planetary transition
Planetary
because
transition.
because it's related to the evolution of our world via the evolution of its inhabitants, right? And most specifically in our situation now, the moral transformation of us as individuals, starting from within, as we've been discussing here tonight.
Great,
Mhm.
great.
Love it. Yep.
Yep. And I would jump on that then and kind of go next and say, yeah, we're definitely in the moments of transition, and it's an important moment in our history and a story as spirits and as humanity in general. And it's the end of times, but not the end of times that we have come to think of, from our culture. It's this moment, the key moment in this generation, or so to speak, in the next maybe 100 years or so or more, where we're going to have to really make deep changes to how we live and how we act. And that is a really big departure from before. But I also want to focus on the positive and say, imagine the results of a world where people are collaborating, are really helping each other. We focus sometimes on the negative things and the fear and the anger, but we forget to look ahead and see what's the result of this. I'm often reminded of that passage of Jesus calming the storm. And the reason why they're navigating, we forget because we're in the middle of the storm, is to get to the other side. And so I think we're in the middle of the storm, but we forgot that why we are here. We are here to get to the other side, that we were made for this. So I'm excited that we are living in the spirits, that we have a chance to live in these difficult periods, but things are going to get better. It's going to be a wonderful place once we fix up and patch up the house, right?
100%. Mm-hmm.
To me, what comes to mind: transition, transformation, rebirth, the idea of Lazarus coming back to life, and when Jesus tells, to unwrap him and to let him go, the idea that it wasn't only important for him to return, but it was necessary to unwrap him from the illusions that he had been holding on to that point. It was necessary for him to be reborn, but to be reborn with new values, a new man from within. So planetary transition is precisely this process, and as Dan said, it's not all shouldn't be felt as a negative thing, but as a great opportunity for us to let go of all the things that no longer serve us, that no longer contributing to our lives, to enrich for a better quality of life, and to truly invest on what can give us a new life, or as Jesus says, life in abundance.
Yeah, I like that, Susanna.
Perfect.
I think we're this transition. This is our last chance, right? Sort of our last minute, opportunity to do more, right? To really let go of materialism, to let go of the focus and the efforts predominantly towards betterment of our material things. Instead, right, to change the overall values, to have better or more bigger, more ample eyes towards the spiritual side of the house, right? Towards our spiritual lives, towards forget about those illusions and the immediacy that we oftentimes live, and really focus on the light, focus on the future. So that way, we'll position ourselves to remain here on Earth, close to our loved ones, as we mentioned before. Because if we choose pain, if we choose to not follow that, we might be exiled to other worlds, other planets, right? Depending on us and us only, not anybody else, because we all have free will, as we mentioned. So again, I see this as the last chapter of this book, but that's not the only book. There's a series of books, right, that we are going to write about our stories, and this is the last chapter of this particular book that we're living these days.
Great, great. And before we wrap it up, hey, Flavio, that's a great segue, which was not set up at all because we do this informally. But what are some of the books? What are some of the resources that folks can kind of go deeper into if they want to learn more about the topic? We talked about a couple of them today, right? We talked about Genesis, which is the fifth book of the Spiritist codification or compilation, the kind of books that kind of kick Spiritism off.
Yep.
The Genesis has that whole piece about reinterpreting the words of the Christ and kind of understanding things through a new meaning. The last part of it, chapter 17 and 18, deal with this. I think somebody else, Flavio also mentioned a book called Planetary Transition, interesting enough, which is a series of books too. Look at that, Heather.
Right.
Let's zoom in on Heather. Hey, Heather, hold that up again for us. That's a book by
Not
Devaldo
prepared, like all of us.
Yeah.
Look at that, Heather. Congratulations.
Yeah. by the Spirit Manuel Filomena de Miranda, which is really interesting as well. And of course, a lot of other messages in Spiritist literature that you can find in different places. But we're very excited. We want to thank you for listening today. Remind you that you can always go back to YouTube or Facebook and rewatch this, or if you're a fan of podcasts and you're hearing us as a podcast, whatever you find your great podcasts, we also want to let you know that there's also a video piece to this episode. Not always. We don't always do this in video, but we're trying to. So do that. And we also, before we wrap up, we want to, hey, Heather, I hear that you're doing a new activity as well, right? Are you doing a new video series?
Yes, Kardec Radio invited Explore Spiritism, which I run the Explore Spiritism Facebook page. I'm a co-developer of the Explore Spiritism website, and we were invited to have we're doing it bi-weekly, so a bi-weekly segment on Kardec Radio, and I'm for anyone who's been following Explore Spiritism, I use that really as an umbrella to talk about all different aspects of Spiritism itself. And on this particular segment on Kardec Radio, it's kind of like I'll be doing some commentary and reflection, and also some touching on the fundamentals of Spiritist teachings itself. You know, can go in all different directions with the umbrella, as I say, of Explore Spiritism. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's a new endeavor that I'm pretty excited about, and I encourage anyone to join me. It's every other Wednesday night on Kardec Radio.
Wonderful. And thanks for dropping by, Heather. And just a reminder for folks out there, follow Explore Spiritism. Find Heather in the social media in general. We also want to remind people, you can also find us on social media as well, but because you got enough of us, you can figure us out. But we also want to let you know that we have a couple of episodes coming up. So on May 27, we're going to have one about music spiritually, and we're going to have our friend Fred from New York, and also our friend Adam from the UK, who's going to be joining us. And then on June 6th, we're going to be doing a special edition, which was planned to be a live session for the 14th U.S. Spiritist Symposium. And as you know, the symposium has been moved to a virtual edition. It's the first time we do it. The topic of that one, it's going to be Can Tech and Spirituality Connect? And it's actually June 10th. Yeah, so that's an opportunity. And we have more coming up. And thanks for subscribing. Thanks for following us. And we hope to see you soon. And a big thank you to all of you guys who are either listening or watching. And if you enjoy this, let us know and share that with a friend too. That's how people get to know what we're doing. So thanks everybody, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.